Greetings, family. It's really an honour to be here, and I'd like to first of all thank Brother Alpha for inviting me to participate in this very important international conference which is celebrating the life and legacy and contributions of Queen Nzinga and what it means for us all. And so for myself as a reparationist, which is basically a reparations scholar, activist and campaigner, I'm very much inspired by the life and legacy of Queen Nzinga in terms of the contribution she played in establishing African sovereignty. And sovereignty is something that we have lost largely in our motherland. Because even though we still have our traditional kingdoms and our forms of governance, the whole motherland itself has gone through various phases of conquest. And from the time that we encountered our colonizers, beginning with the Arab so-called, followed by European so-called, we've not regained our sovereignty. Our sovereignty, our power base, our ability to affect our will for our people and in international relations. And one of the areas that we are seeing this loss of sovereignty is in the way that the resources of our motherland continue to be extracted and pillaged by various colonizers now, there's so many, and misused to wage wars on peoples from the majority of humanity. So from what has happened to us, and we lost our place, we have not known peace. And so reparations is about, first of all, stopping the harm of what some of us refer to in the Kiswahili term as the maangamizi, which really speaks to the intentional destruction of a group or a people. Now, many of us may say, well, we haven't been destroyed. We're resilient. You know, we've transcended. We're still here. Yes. And we've continued to fight. But the destruction of our cultures, of our forms of governance, our ways of actually ordering our societies, that is still something that is there. And even in our motherland, many of our traditional governance systems are still kind of treated as second class to the neo-colonial nation states which are Bantustans. Whether they are in Africa, or whether they are in the Caribbean, or whether they are in South America, in countries where we are the majority of the populations. So reparations is really important. I was asked to speak on what does reparations and repatriation mean for African people in the diaspora and the motherland. So reparations are about us returning ourselves, restituting to ourselves who we are, but also restoring our power base geopolitically and materially. And our power base is our homeland, our motherland, that today we refer to as Africa. It's about restoring that. When today Africa is being recolonized. Not just the Chinese, the Europeans, the French, the English, that is being being recolonized.
All of them.
Especially coming through so-called Northern Africa. What's happening using this guise of so-called terrorism and fighting terrorism, that's what we're seeing. And the taking out, the assassination of Gaddafi was also about easy access to Africa south of the Sahara. So we continue to be warred upon. And yet, reparations, which is something that is about our liberation, has been co-opted, has been actually depoliticized, and many of us, because we are outside of our African mind and worldview and reality and thought processes, we are using metrics of repair that will never restore us. So we look for money in a world where so-called modern money is only a few hundred years old. Okay? True wealth is not about money. So we want money whilst they maintain the lands and benefit from all of the resources that come out of the lands. And we literally live like tenants on lands that are ancestral lands that we have a responsibility to be stewards of. So what does reparations mean for us? It means that we have to return to ourselves and restore ourselves. The restitution, which is a key principle of reparations under so-called international law. People focus on the compensation. Don't get me wrong. Those resources that people are looking for are important in terms of resourcing our own self-repair initiatives. But compensation should really serve the ends of restitution. What is restitution? To put a people or a group back in a position we would have been in, but for the Ma'angamisi, our power base. We are the mothers and fathers of human civilization, but yet we are almost being treated like the children and actually a footstool that everyone stands on. Our peoples in Southern Africa, West Africa, across Africa still remain conquered. And many of the so-called deals of independence did nothing about restoring our title, our so-called native title or customary title, to be in connection with our ancestral lands. So reparation is that move, not only to restore us and rebuild us, to stop the harm, which is the cessation of the violations, but to ensure that our repair process, which is part of the continued struggle for Pan-African liberation at home and abroad, brings about the world that our ancestors were in the process of creating. Amilcar Cabral, that great revolutionary, spoke about the need to return to the source of our being, the source of our knowledges.
Ubuntu.
And that is what we are still to do, to return to the source, to reclaim everything, to take back everything that has been taken from us. But we cannot do that unless we organize and we recognize that we are connected. Because many of us have lost knowledge of who we really are. We've been dispossessed of our lineage. We are victims and survivors of ethnocide and genocide. Because ethnocide is the destruction of a group's culture and identity without destroying the people. So yes, we are here. But in what capacity? What names are many of us carrying? Still with the imprint of our colonizers. What languages are we speaking? Do we speak our native tongue? Because we know that to speak a language is to create, is to envision a world and a reality beyond this kind of unipolar world that Europe has created. So part of our thrust is about restoring Ma'at. Ma'at, the ancient Kemetan ideal of justice and what it means to live in harmony on this earth with ourselves, with humanity, who we are mothers and fathers of, not the children of, but also to restore our right relationship with our motherland and our mother earth, that which sustains us and gives us the power to be able to command the elements in our favor, which is what our people did in our liberation struggles and our wars of resistance. We were able to command the forces of nature to defeat our colonizers. And it is that power base that we need to harness. So restoring Ma'at, but also some of us, particularly in the UK, contingent of the International Social Movement for African Reparations, we see reparations as being about the restoration of Ma'at, but as a kind of state formation, a Pan-African union of our indigenous nations, not of countries, not of the countries that are maintaining the borders of Europe and Euro-Africa. It's not a United States, because those borders themselves are manifestations of the Ma'angamizi, because they separate indigenous African ethnicity and nationality and polity from its power base and our resources. And the colonizers did that deliberately to break up our union and our ability to effectively counter them. So repair is also about a return to our indigeneity, to remember ourselves, to reconnect with our African ancestries and lineages. So we need lineage repair and restoration, because many of us today, we call on the ancestors. We say we want compensation for their labor and what they did, but many of us dishonor our ancestors. And we are like grave diggers, waiting to plow and to create benefit from something that we have not sown. So we have to get back to our ways, so we know that there is a cosmic harmony. And as we want done, we must do. The 33rd principle of Ma'at says, I will not commit treason against my ancestors. And since we're also honoring ancestors today, how many of us can truly say we haven't committed treason against our ancestors? So what does it mean to commit treason? It means to not follow their freedom vision. We want to come with all other forms of nationalism today that are not recognizable to our ancestors. That are not based on Ma'at, are not based on Ubuntu. Because we want to be modern. But yet we're following people who themselves are so dehumanized that they have to look to artificial intelligence and transhumanism to replace us. And these are the people we are following. So it's big picture and it's small picture. We talk about Ma'at Ubuntu Man, which is basically a repaired Pan-Africa. A Pan-Africa that incorporates the 6th region today, as we are called in the diaspora, but it's not the African Union. It is an Africa that is based on the highest ideals of Ma'at and Ubuntu in terms of how we relate to the rest of the planet. And therefore, it is not a super state, because we're not replicating the model of statehood that comes out of Europe and the German Westphalian model, which alienates the peoples and the citizenries. So we have to go back to our own forms of governance, and that is the example that Queen Nzinga leaves for us, to look at what it means to be sovereign. But you cannot talk about sovereignty without a connection to land. And land is the basis of our power, and land has to be the basis of our repair. Because to be on land is to restore connection to ancestors. Now, what does that mean for those of us in the diaspora? These are not our ancestral lands. So some will return. They will rematriate, not repatriate, because we refer to a motherland, not a fatherland. It's not repatriation, it is to rematriate. And that is to restore our connection to our mother. To restore our relationship to our planet Earth that sustains our lives. To restore right relationships. To restore harmony and balance and equilibrium. To restore the spiritual connection where we knew that not only are we related, but we are related to all life forms. And we can tune into that power base of the different kingdoms. To nature. This is what it means to repair and restore ourselves. So this repaired Africa can only exist in a repaired world. Because when we live in a world where one nation in Europe or another is threatening to drop nuclear bombs, what reparations are we talking about? How are we factoring in reparations in the context of a global polycrisis? That's not just the crisis of racism and militarism and impoverishment, but there's multiple crises, including the ecological crises and the so-called climate crisis, which is impacting our people the most. So we have to prepare for what it means to live and inhabit land, what it means to grow our food and not expect food to be transported thousands of miles so we can get it. So this model of the repaired Africa in a repaired world, which we refer to as Ubuntu Dunia, which is basically a multipolar, global justice world of pluriversality that's anti-imperialist. So our repair struggle has to catalyze the repair struggles of all other peoples who've been colonized. Because if we don't do that, we will never be guaranteed safety. Never. Because others will come and war upon us, and we cannot be talking about reclaiming our resources without having a military strategy and a battle plan. We can learn from Queen Nzinga about that. Yeah? Because no one's going to let us just look what happened in South Africa with the miners in Marikana when they were just protesting for better wages and conditions, and they were shot down at the behest of their so-called government, the ANC and ruling party, and corporate capital. So that's what we have to contend with in terms of the players who have a stake in our atomization, who have a stake in our depopulation, which has been tried in so many ways, and we're still here. But we have to then think geostrategically, geopolitically, in terms of how we will affect this repair. And so in the UK, we see ourselves as part of a community that is connected to this global struggle that is unfolding on our motherland, Africa, to eliminate many of those borders. And our people are doing it naturally through their trade. Many of our sisters, we're crossing the borders, irrespective of what passport we hold or what citizenship we may hold. And so these satellite communities are called Ma'at Ubuntu Jammers. They are like the Ujamaa villages that were championed in Tanzania by President Nyerere and others, where we learn to live together across our so-called differences and our different journeys. We inhabit land, and that means we have a right to access land here for the purposes of building the institutions that we need to help our people not only survive but thrive. So our survival plan, pending repair and reparations and full reparatory justice. And that process of building these Ma'at Ubuntu Jammers in the diaspora is connected to a similar process unfolding on the continent of building what's called Sankofa Homes. The idea of these are indigenous communities on the continent of Africa, that they are transcending those borders and they are recognizing many of us who are returning. So we're working with these Sankofa Homes right now in Ghana, in the Tayimbe region, in the Volta region, where we even have members of our diaspora community here, the Ma'at Ubuntu Jammeh UK, who have been accepted as citizens of these indigenous nations, as opposed to just citizenship of the nation state. Because when we ground with our people, then we gain their protection. But we don't just go there looking for what we feel we've been dispossessed of. We go there in the best tradition of helping to fight to actually avert that recolonization so that we all can benefit from our resources that continue to be pillaged. And the demands we make around compensation now are about restitution of our resources. We're not yet at compensation. What we need is the resources that these families, these institutions, these governments are holding on to, that they are denying us the right to develop ourselves and build ourselves as a global nation in formation, made up of our indigenous communities, ethnicities, and nationalities. So those are the demands that we're making for our self-repair. And in my closing, you would have seen flyers that are around the place. Brother Delani has some. On the 1st of Mosiah, we have the Pan-African Reparations Rebellion groundings. This has been going on, reclaiming the 1st of so-called August, which we are not, going with the Roman thing. We are naming after our prophets and kings, Marcus Mosiah Garvey. So the 1st of Mosiah is so-called 1st of August. It is traditionally commemorated as Emancipation Day in the Caribbean, in certain parts of Southern Africa, certain parts of North America. But we were not emancipated. This date actually commemorates the further dehumanization of Africans in the British Parliament, which is a crime scene of the Ma'angamizi, because it was in that Parliament in 1833 that they legislated to compensate our enslavers and terrorizers, and our people got nothing. And the debt that was built up from that was only repaid in 2015, which meant if you have been paying taxes in this country, we have been paying off a debt that went to pay off our enslavers. So we've reclaimed this day as a reparations day of action. In between 2014 and 2019, we held a march to Parliament. From 2020 to now, we organise a Pan-African Reparations Rebellion groundings, because we want to ground with our people about the need to rebel. We need to rebel. How can we coexist with a state of death and destruction for our people, where they don't want us, they just want our lands and our resources? Gemisi of today. That is what we are here to do. It's not about what our ancestors are doing. That's why they live in us. And that freedom fighting spirit must prevail amongst us so we can liberate ourselves, not just for ourselves, but for all our generations to come. That is the guarantees of non-repetition. And in our African struggle, we don't do like the Jews do when they say never again will they go through the Jewish Holocaust. Never again. Because they've got Israel, a powerful militarized state that defends the interests of so-called Jewish people worldwide, but not our people, the Hebrews. Okay? So that's what we're talking about, but we're not going to replicate Israel because we need to bring about that harmony, that balance back to our motherland. And that is part of our historic mission and duty. Frantz Fanon taught us that. Each generation, out of relative obscurity, must discover its mission, fulfill it, or betray it. And the question is, where are you in history? What role are you playing? Are your ancestors living in you? Are you venerating them? Are you living in accordance with their wishes and principles and values? Or are you bringing those of our colonizers to now use as a stick to beat our people? Sisters, brothers, kings, queens, thank you for your time, your attention. Thank you for listening to me. And we must remember, and I love this quote from Professor Malena Karenga, reparations is the process and the practice of a people who are repairing themselves, and in that process of repairing themselves, they are repairing the world. So reparations is a civilizational quest. And the question is, are you up to the task? Thank you.